I've heard it said that with a friend, our joy is doubled because we share it, and our burdens are halved because we divide the load. The writer of Ecclesiastes tells us that 2 lives are better than 1, and that a friend helps us get up if we've fallen, keeps us warm if we're cold, and then reminds us that a cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. The Apostle Paul in Galatians 6:2 puts it this way: help to carry one another's burdens, and in this way you will obey the law of Christ. It's really the same message. And that the 3 strands, one of them is a person struggling, the other person is the person helping, and the third strand is where the real strength lies, and that's in the love of God, woven into the love and care and support of one for another. Now, when Paul was talking in Galatians, he doesn't just tell us to encourage someone who's carrying a burden, or he doesn't tell us to go and tell them how to carry it. No, we're told to help them carry it. When someone is carrying a burden, it's like they've got a large, heavy object, and they may only be able to take a few steps with that object before they're exhausted. They may not feel like they're making any progress. And while words of encouragement are nice, hey, that's the way to go. Good job. Boy, you're strong. Helping them with heavy lifting is what is really needed. And that's what God calls us to do. God calls us to carry each other's burdens. Now that sounds great, but how do we actually begin? Well, we begin with our own hearts. And many of us, most of us, come with some broken hearts. It's so easy to let our fractured heart be the only lens that we see others or the world around us through. Amanda Gorman gave us a wonderful reminder in her beautiful inaugural poem that there is always light if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. See, the heart is strong and it has capacity to give life. After all, we are hearts that touch. Now I can hear some of you saying, here you go again, Bob, all that heart and love stuff. Maybe you think this sounds too sentimental in a real and fractured world, but this is a world where hurts are real. This is a world where hearts hurt and hearts touch, where hearts break and hearts hope, where hearts splinter and hearts heal. And it is often from that very broken-hearted place, those splintered places of our own hearts, that we learn to give and love in a way so that we can come alongside another person and help carry their burdens. And by so doing, we are doing what Paul says, fulfilling the law of Christ. Our ability to fulfill the law in this way comes not from some tangential relationship with God, but it actually comes from an intimate experience and love of Jesus. And this intimacy is where we experience the power of God's grace, of God's love, and God's strength that fuels us and opens us up to serving one another. Now, when we open ourselves to sharing another's burden, it's important that we must also guard our hearts and our minds so we are careful to remain humble as we come alongside somebody who's suffering. It is so easy as we're helping someone carry their burden to slip into the trap of thinking more highly of ourselves than we should, especially when we're surrounded by another's shortcomings. The suffering and struggles in people's lives, the truth is they're really usually very multifaceted. Now, some struggle and burden comes upon people by no fault of their own, while other times their struggles, their pain, their suffering is a direct result of their choices and decisions. And that's not just true for other people, that's true for all of us. It's important to realize that God sometimes allows suffering for a variety of reasons. Sometimes God uses times of suffering to break the chains that are in our own hearts. Sometimes God allows suffering to purify us and bring us closer to God. And sometimes God allows suffering to strengthen us and discipline. Suffering, burdens, and struggles, they're not always a sign of something that a person has done wrong. Sometimes God is just using suffering to prepare us for something greater. Now, when we stand beside a brother or sister in a time of struggle, we're living out God's desire for how we should treat one another. We're called, we're commanded to love our neighbor as ourselves. What does that look like? As a pastor, we get the painful honor of spending time and walking along with people at some of their lowest moments of their life. I've come to realize that over the years that I or we can't take away their suffering. We can't, and I can't, just pray away their suffering. But we can be support. And this isn't just pastors. This is each of us as a lover and follower of Jesus. We can help shoulder the load and the burden of another person. In Exodus 17, God called Moses to raise his staff into the air for the entirety of a battle to ensure Israel's victory. And when Moses' hands and arms grew tired, his friends came alongside him and held them up for him. Could you imagine holding a staff in the air for an entire day? Your muscles would begin to quiver. Your fingers would grow numb. And the moment that your arms began to lower, the people that you were there to support and encourage, they would begin to lose the battle. Moses couldn't quit or walk away from the task that God had given him. And it was up to his friends to help him stay strong through the pain. His friends came alongside him, supported him as he followed God's call. And in so doing, in this story, Israel won victory over an entire nation. Another example is when Jesus performed an amazing miracle and he raised Lazarus from the dead. Could you imagine what Lazarus was thinking as he walked out of a tomb that he had been in and dead for 4 days, grave clothes still wrapped around his face and body? In John 11:43, Jesus commands the loved ones of Lazarus to take off the grave clothes. Now, Jesus is the one who worked the miracle, but he left it up to the friends to unwrap the dirty clothes. You and I, we're called to hold up the arms of our friends and to unravel the grave clothes of our brothers and sisters who are in need. And maybe you're thinking right now, but man, I've got enough burdens of my own. Why should I be carrying someone else's load too? We talk all the time that we should love one another. Practice kindness and compassion. But here's the deal. Love can only spill from a heart that has been softened and in many cases already broken. And these encounters, if I do give or offer my heart, if I offer to come alongside and help another person, I want you to know that our heart comes back to us in better shape because it comes back softer. There's no doubt that when we're faced with tragedy or chaos or uncertainty or misfortune, we want to get a handle on it. We want to fix it. We want to make it go away. But this is not what carrying one another's burdens is about. It's not about just a way to figure life out. It's also not about judging someone or trying to determine whether someone has unintentionally or intentionally invited chaos into their world. It is about the permission to see the world this day, right this moment, through the eyes of our heart. A heart made soft. And a heart made soft happens when we allow ourselves to feel fully and wholly without a need to judge or fully understand another person's situation. A heart softens when we allow ourselves to give love and kindness without expecting something in return. And we're free to embrace a core strength and courage that resides in us and allow it to spill over to those that are around us. One of the greatest and often rarest gifts that we can give another person is the gift of listening. So often when a person will share what they're going through, a family member's illness, a conflict with a son or a daughter, a job that isn't working out, or some other difficulty, we find ourselves responding in a couple ways, and sometimes they're not always so helpful. Some of us, we try to steal the spotlight. We hear the pain that they're describing, and the moment they finish, we've hardly listened to them. We've been so busy thinking about what we're going to say next. They finish sharing what they're going through, and we respond by saying, yeah, that's like this time that and we proceed to tell them a story from our own experience that may or may not resemble their experience. Now, maybe we're trying to demonstrate some common ground, but we have to be very careful. Sometimes the story can be helpful, but sometimes the effect is unintentionally pulling all the attention away from the person's hurting heart in order to put ourselves in the limelight. And secondly, sometimes we just dismiss the gravity of what this person is going through. Don't worry, you'll be fine. Oh, that's not so bad. Or God must have a purpose. It's all going to work out. Yet even if those things are true, that response can easily ignore the legitimate pain of what a person might be going through at the moment. To listen and affirm the experience and emotions of what others are sharing is one of the most powerful gifts that we can give. Learn to listen. Learn to hear the emotions that someone is sharing. Hear it without correcting them, without comparing it, without dismissing it. Throughout this COVID-19 pandemic, every single experience that people have seems to be unique. Some people will get the virus and will have no symptoms, and others it leads to death. I overheard a conversation not long ago where two people were talking about COVID-19, and one of them shared how their brother had died from this virus. And you could see the pain in their heart. You could see the pain in their face as they were sharing this. And the person they were talking to said to them, oh, I had it too, and it wasn't bad at all. It was just like a flu or a mild cold. What you're going through is not the same as what someone else is facing. What overwhelms or bothers you will be different from me. We need to take the time to enter into the experience of what others are feeling and genuinely listen to their pain and emotion that the person's sharing. Something that we could all do for somebody is we could pray for them. Prayer for another person is such a powerful response. When someone's sharing their heartache and we offer to pray for them, whether you're going to pray right in that moment with them or afterwards on your own, acknowledge that person's grief, that person's worry, that person's sadness or fear in the presence of God. And ask God for specific help for that person. Ask God to show you what it is that you could do to help carry that person's burden. You know, it is easy sometimes to feel like that prayer is doing nothing, but it is actually the most powerful tool that we have at our disposal. Few people will ever refuse your prayers if you ask if you can pray for them. Even if they're not believers in God, they'll be touched that you want to advocate for them before your God. Helping carry a burden is done in so many ways. And often it's done in small, meaningful ways. It's been said that it's possible to move a mountain, even if you must move it one stone at a time. Sometimes the burdens we carry seem impossibly large. Maybe it's the loss of a spouse and you're crushed under the load of grief. Maybe medical bills, credit card debt, overdue mortgages have left you drowning in debt. with no hope in sight. Bearing one another's burdens often means taking the initiative to serve in small but meaningful ways day by day. Now, I may not be able to take the sadness of a person who has lost their spouse, but I can stop by with a week's worth of groceries. I may not be able to take the fear away from parents whose young daughter is undergoing chemotherapy, but I could buy them a gas card to help with their expenses. I could let a person know I'm thinking of them, and I can offer to watch a single mom's child while she works an extra shift. Small and simple gestures, but they communicate a great deal of care and concern. And it actually is better if we're specific when we're offering help. You know, we could say, let me know if there's anything I can do, but often a person experiencing hardship feels overwhelmed. Sometimes they're not even able to recognize what it is they need. And on top of that, sometimes they're embarrassed that they need help. And so they won't give you a call. So think of something specific, a form of service that will help take some of that burden from them. Moving a mountain is possible, one stone at a time. But imagine instead of just one person moving one stone at a time, there's an army of people who step in to move one stone at a time. Moving a mountain suddenly seems like a much more manageable task. And that is what we as followers of Jesus are called to be doing in Galatians 6:2, when the Apostle Paul calls us to carry one another's burdens. In this way, you fulfill the law of Christ. For Paul, this is simply an obvious application of the gospel, of the good news of Jesus. And if we understand the gospel, we will enter into the burdens of others, even burdens that are brought on by another person's own sinfulness. If we believe the gospel, then we become like the gospel, overflowing with grace. And Paul points out that carrying each other's burdens, it actually is fulfilling the love of Christ, the law of Christ. Because Christ's law is to love God and to love one another. Now, you may have heard the golden rule, do unto others what you want them to do to you. Paul here upgrades the golden rule to the platinum rule. Do to others what Jesus did for you. The law of Christ is that you love your neighbor by voluntarily sharing in their burdens. You want to know what's actually easier than carrying another's burdens? Judging them. It's so easy to judge others for their struggles that we don't share. Whether those are struggles arising from the color of a person's skin, or from the mistakes a person has made in their past, or something else altogether. It is alarmingly easy to see someone else's struggle and respond with pride and arrogance and a condescending tone. If we're going to be people who've actually been shaped by the love of Jesus, we need to remember that each of us has a different burden to carry. And every last one of us, no matter who we are, is dependent upon God's grace to help us carry that. Think about the metaphor of a literal burden. If someone is struggling to carry a duffel bag that weighs 100 pounds, how do you help them? You take one end, they take the other, and now no one is carrying the 100 pounds by themselves. Each one is carrying about 50 pounds. In other words, in order to help that person, some of the burden has to fall on you. And that's precisely how we should relate to one another as brothers and sisters in Christ. Truth is, it's much simpler and easier and way less messy if we just avoid thinking about things that don't affect us personally. But if we're truly the lovers and followers of Jesus that we claim to be, we'll be aware of the pain and the struggle and the suffering that others are going through. We'll be aware of the opportunities that we get to experience that others don't have. And we can use any position of our opportunity or privilege or strength that we enjoy to serve others. So here's my challenge to you as well as to myself. Think about the burdens that you're carrying right now. How many of those burdens are the burdens of others? One of the signs that we're living out the love of Jesus is a willingness to share in the burdens of others. Amen.